Hi, this is Tim Lightfellow in the Kingdom of Ontario in the Society for Creative Anachronism. Today's video, I had a hard time coming up with what the title should be. The basic idea is discussing arrows. What brought this about was discussing arrow options with someone, typically as one who makes arrows. If someone asks me if I can make arrows for them, I'll ask for things like, what's your draw length? Um, what's the draw weight of the bow? Uh, what colors do you want? And do you have any preference on fletch type? And are you interested in standard field tips or screw-on tips? So those are a couple of the things I ask. And through that, I've had a couple discussions that led me to realize that there are a lot of options that people may not be aware of, that may or may not have an impact on the performance of the arrow. So what I was wanting to do is a video basically just kind of going over, here's an arrow, here are the parts of an arrow, which you probably already know if you're watching this, but you may not. But what are the different options for each of these parts when someone's making an arrow? What are the different things they can use, like different types of nocks, different types of fletches, different types of tips, um, different woods for the arrow, things like that. And, you if they're purely an aesthetic difference or if they are known to actually have a performance difference based on the options. So the most common things is, how long of an arrow do you need? You can use if something like this, which is a draw length measuring stick. You put it on your bow, just like you do an arrow. You draw to your anchor point, and someone reads the the marks and figures out where is in front of your arrow rest, and so you know what length of arrows to order. You can always also use just a tape measure. I've seen people use like a regular arrow, grab it where it's at, where the your length would be, and then measure the length. Once they've got it off the bow, there are lots of ways to do it. Um, so that gives arrow length for ideal. Now, there are always options on arrow length. Maybe you've always shot longer arrows and you just want to keep doing it. Maybe you shoot clout or York or other distance shoots, so you want to have an extra inch or 2 inches to overdraw for longer shoots to get a little more power in your shots. Those are all things to consider in terms of arrow length. Um, Draw weight, you can use a bow scale. I unfortunately don't have mine right now. I have two of them. I have an analog one and a digital one. Um, the analog one of the pieces broke off of, and I noticed right from the start that it's 5 pounds out of calibration. So I have to remember to add 5 pounds whenever I scale a bow with it. So I went out and got a digital one that seems to be well calibrated and works well. So those are the most important thing, because if you have the wrong spine of an arrow for your bow, it's not going to shoot as well. It's not going to be as consistent. If it's too heavy, it'll not flex it all around the bow, so it'll tend to go to a side rather than shooting straight. Um, if it's too light, it'll tend to flex too much and go to the other side. If it's way too light, it can actually uh, break when all the force of the string is released and pushes the arrow. Um, I've seen, I think I've seen that once, and it was someone who was uh, trying to make as light an arrow as he could for a flight shoot, and it ended up underspined and just kind of disintegrated when he let go of the string. Anyway, so those are the most important things when it comes to an arrow and having it match your bow. Now, for an arrow, just to make sure before I start discussing other options that we're on the same page, this is the nock. That's the part that hooks onto the string. It can be a separate piece that's glued on or attached, like most of what I'm going to show you, or it can be cut into the shaft itself. The fletches. Wasn't going to address this per se in this video, but so this is what's called the back dip, and then this is what's called cresting, or it's called a crown dip is another option for that. Anyway, that shouldn't have any impact on performance, and that's generally done just to kind of tie into your colors and just give the arrow a little bit more of a fancy look. So you have the arrow shaft and you have the tips. So what I'm going to start with is nock options. If you're shooting a modernish recurve, let me step back one piece. I should have said at the start of this video, this is looking at traditional SCA style shooting, so wood arrows and what we allow for shooting. So nothing to do with aluminum arrows, carbon arrows, therefore nothing to do with things like pin nocks that are used in those types of arrows. Okay, that said, our options for nocks vary. We typically, within the SCA, use plastic nocks, especially when we're first getting started, when we're shooting what in Ontario is called the open category, which is generally recurve, so static or takedown recurve, center cutout, shelf, or shooting off like a feather rest or off the shelf or off an arrow rest. Tend to use plastic nocks also because frankly they tend to be more available, they tend to be less expensive. You get into self nocks, and especially if you Robin Hood, it can be expensive or maybe even not even possible to repair. So this tends to be kind of the entry point thing for arrows. What I'm hoping we'll display here. So these are some different types of plastic nocks. Let me try and turn them all so you can see them. So we have just a standard plastic nock. We have a similar one that has a little tab here that's called an index. What that does often, if you have a 3 Fletch arrow, people, I've never managed to do this, but the idea is you can get used to when you grab it out of your quiver, you spin it to that index so you know that you're putting it on the string the right direction. It can help you to speed up your time on timed ends by not having to look to see where that odd feather is on your 3 Fletch arrow. So again, so you know that when you knock it on, you're knocking it correctly. One of these, you'll notice, has a wider opening. I'm not certain if it's the official term, but I've heard these referred to as speed nocks. The idea of the wider opening is it's really easy to line it up with the string, and it'll push, basically push the back of the arrow onto the string. The thing about that is you have to kind of hold it in place as you draw. So you need to have your fingers up against the arrow and then push the arrow up against the nock bead. Whereas a lot of times these other styles are designed to snap on I'm not sure how well it might show on this black one. Actually, ironically, if I get behind it, it shows better. So you'll notice it actually has a little more of an opening down at the bottom. So that's designed to snap onto the string. Let me take a look. There's another, oh, that's a broken one. That doesn't even help us. Okay. There's another one that's kind of a speed. It's kind of a mix of what we just looked at. So it's white at the top, so it's going to be a little easier to get it on the string, but it's also got the bigger opening down here, so it's still going to snap onto the string. And it also has a very small index on it that probably won't even show on the camera. Let's see. It shows just slightly. It's a really small index. And the other thing I find interesting is that index is literally on the back of where you'd tend to want it. Okay, so options for knocks. Speed knocks can speed up timed ends because you can get the knocks on the string faster. They can also cause you more grief because they tend to not snap on the string, so you tend to have to hold them actually in place while you shoot. Whereas these other standard plastic ones tend to snap on the string, so you don't have to be worried about getting your fingers fully up against them to hold them. But they also have a smaller opening, so you have to get it lined up to get it on the string, which can take a little more time on a timed end. One thing that I'll also point out is any of the plastic knocks, you can actually, the way I've done it is put it into hot water, almost boiling, and you just want, just the end of it, because otherwise you'll break the glue bond. But, and then with the bow strung up, you can use that to pinch these closed or slide this under the string to force it open and make it fit your string better. So that's an advantage to the plastic ones over a self knock. Self knocks you have to file to get it to the right width. Okay, so that gives some options there. Period. So self knocks, like I was just mentioning, typically what you see is something like this. It's part of the arrow shaft. It's cut in. This one's actually cut in a little bit of a V compared to what I've normally seen. So this is a little more of a kind of a speed knock variety, as it were. It looks like it's designed to not snap on, and it's designed that it should be a little faster than some to fit on the string. Now, this is actually a glue-on hardwood knock. So it functions the same way as a self knock, but you can glue it on. So if you don't have all the tools to make a self knock, but you have the tools to taper a shaft, you can buy these and glue these on. There's a couple different versions. Or if you have an old set of arrows you want to turn into a period set, you could take off the plastic knocks and put these ones on. So these offer that option of making it hopefully a little bit easier for people to get period arrows to shoot. Excuse me. So, and again, the benefits of this style is number one, if you have a set of arrows you don't shoot anymore, you could always strip off the plastic knocks, put these on, and make yourself a quick set of period arrows. If you don't have the tools to do self knocks, this gives you a way to do period arrows. If you Robin Hood this, there's a chance that you only break the knock, so you can again take it off like you would a plastic knock and then glue on a new one. Whereas this style, if you break the knock, you can see where if you do much damage to it, it's done, or else you might be able to cut it short and cut another knock in, but then you've shortened your arrow, and then you're trying to hold the arrow right next to the fletches. So most of the time you Robin Hood this. If you do much damage, the arrow's gone. So that should cover basics for knocks. Again, other than the requirement that if it's an extra open knock, like a speed knock, that you have to kind of physically hold it up against the knock bead to keep it in place. Whereas the other ones, especially if they snap on to the string, you can generally not worry about that. Otherwise, no shooting advantage one way or the other. It's just the speed of loading one versus the other, and the fact that one stays in place, whereas the other one, you have to make sure you're grabbing it correctly to hold it in place. Okay, on to fletches. So this is one thing I didn't quite understand until I was taught to make arrows. So fletches, if you look at them from the back, you have the feather, and then you have the what I believe is called the quick at the bottom, the part that you actually glue on. And when you look at it from the back, you'll either see an L shape or a reverse L shape. If it looks like an L, it's a left wing. If it doesn't look like an L, it's a right wing. And I think it effectively looks kind of T-shaped, upside down T-shaped for a straight fletch. And I've seen some comments on various places that there are thoughts out there that which hemisphere you're in determines which wing you should use. I've shot left wing, I've shot right wing. I don't know that I've shot any straight wings. All that does is it is a factor of the person making the arrow, what fletching jig they have. If they have a left wing jig, they're going to use left wings fletches when they make arrows. If they have right wing, they're going to use right wing. And that's because it's designed to handle the curve of the feather and to get it lined up correctly on the shaft. Shooting it, what you'll notice is, again, they're curved opposite each other. So what that just means is one will want to spin one way and one will want to spin the other. Still going to spin as long as they're put on correctly. So left wing, right wing, not going to have a performance difference. Straight, I frankly haven't seen straight available from most vendors in quite a while. I don't know if they're still necessarily something people can purchase. If you do, again, you'd have to put enough of an angle one direction or the other consistently, because you need to have it catch the wind and so it can start the arrow spinning. But again, there should be no performance difference. Now, let's look at some of the other things. So Fletch Shapes. We have shield shape. Another shield shape. We have parabolic, so it has a rounded back. We have flu-flus, which is literally a full length, a full height feather cut to whichever length you're using. And you'll notice some of these, like these are really short parabolics. You'll notice these are probably about a 5-inch, looks like shield shape. You can get shield shape down to, I think it's 2-inch. Gateway makes what they call a razor fletch, and they're a shield shape and they're really short. Trying to think. I've seen some other ones. You'll see shapes where people cut their own so they can make them whatever shape they want. Biggest thing I've seen that way is they'll take something like this and they'll actually cut the end off. So if you look at the feather naturally is angled, each little bit of the feather. So they'll take that angle and they'll go follow that down and cut that back end off. So instead of the shield shape, you'll have where the back of the feather is actually sticking back further than where it attaches to the arrow. Again, feather shape, I haven't noticed a performance difference. Some people prefer one or the other. Uh, a lot of people tend to think that the shield shape looks better. Where you will see performance difference is the length of the fletch. So again, to give you an example, let's take, since I think a couple different parabolics, we'll grab those. So these are 3-inch parabolics. This is a 5-inch parabolic. The difference is then the smaller they are, the less drag they have, the longer, the more drag. Depending on the power of your bow, you may want more drag because that may help to balance the arrow. So what I do tend to see is that heavier spine arrows, such as this one, will tend to go with a bit longer fletch. Even though it adds a little drag, it also adds stability to the arrow. And part of that is more weight in back. You change where the point of balance is. More weight in back or more weight in front changes your balance point. Let's see. So here's what I'm talking about is the balance point on this one is about the halfway point. It's just barely front of center, it looks like. And usually you're trying for more up in this range for front of center weight. So longer fletches can add a bit more weight to the back. They can also add a little more drag, which can, again, for heavier, it seems like what I tend to see is heavier arrows. It's used more to help create that stability, whereas lighter arrows, you put too much drag on a really light arrow and you're probably just going to kill it. I haven't done experimentation, so that is a theoretical, but what I've found is for lighter arrows, I tend to prefer shorter fletches, and it feels like they fly better. Okay, so shaft, there are lots of wood types. The wood type generally shouldn't impact performance. What impacts performance is the spine weight being matched to the bow and the length of the arrow being matched to the archer. But there are different options once you start. Usually 5/16 cedar or spruce goes from about 20 pounds to about 40. It can go up to about 45. Usually more than that, you start getting into some of the hardwoods, ash, things like that. And then 11/32 are usually about 30 to 35 up to, I've seen them usually for spruce and cedar 60 to 65. And again, once you go beyond that, you start getting into hardwoods. As an arrow maker, hardwoods are harder to deal with in terms of like straightening them and that, but otherwise, performance-wise, they should be the same. As long as, again, see previous comment, as long as they're matched to the bow, because that is the critical part. Okay, so that being said, we are going to take a look at arrow tips. And I'm trying, forgive me as I kind of look around the camera for a moment. I was thinking I might have, oh, I do. Okay. Sorry about that. I thought I had everything in order and I did not. So arrow tips range from crimp on tips, which are most often seen store-bought, usually kids' arrows, really lightweight arrows. And they're just kind of a hollow metal blunted piece that is literally crimped onto the end of the arrow shaft. Standard glue-on field points. They can look like just, there are several versions I've seen. Typically the ones that I'm managing to buy now, they look like this one. They have a dual taper. The taper is designed to help stop it once it hits the target because it creates more friction. One thing I'm realizing I didn't grab is there is also a bullet point shape that's also, I won't say common. I see it used a lot more on, say, champion's arrows. It's often more decorative, but I know an archer in another barony here that shoots them, and actually it was what was available when I made my last set of crossbow bolts, so it's what I put on my crossbow bolts. Again, performance-wise, this to bullet point, screw-on field point, there would be no difference in flight characteristics between these. There shouldn't. This is a little more of a longer taper. It might give a minuscule advantage in flight, but I've not noticed anything. The one thing that impacts on this is, again, your front of center spot on your arrow shaft and the weight of these. So typically you can get field points. I always forget the lightest one. I think the lighter ones are 80 grain, 100 grain, 125 grain are the ones I'm familiar with. These are all 100, actually, this is 100 grain. This looks like 100. This might be a 125 because it looks a bit longer. So again, you can use the grain weight. The grain weight of the tips can do a couple things for you. One is it can change your balance point or your front of center point on your arrow. The other is it can have an impact on the spine. So if your arrow is spined at 35 pounds and you have a 100 grain tip on there and you're shooting a 30 to 32 pound bow, you could put a heavier tip of like a 125 grain and you are effectively decreasing the spine of the arrow because the arrow then has to push more weight, so it will flex more. If you go lighter tip, the arrow is pushing less weight, so you effectively increase the spine of the arrow. So that's the options on arrows and the differences in what does or doesn't actually have an impact on flight of an arrow. Looking just at the arrow side, not looking at bow side, because there's all things about tuning your bow and making it perform optimally, which is not what this video is about. So I hope that that's helpful. Thank you for watching. I hope you all have a good day.